Hello, welcome back to MidEast in Depth, part of Levant TV's Press Reviews. Today we will be looking at what the media is saying about Iraq. As ISIS marches towards Baghdad, Michael Knights of the Washington Institute asks the question, can Washington afford to sit on the sidelines? Knights believes Washington must act if the United States want to stop the ISIS from becoming the only cohesive military and political force in Iraq's Sunni districts. Knights says, behind closed doors, multiple Iraqi government officials relate to me. The Iraqi government has insistently requested US airstrikes on the ISIS. For the US administration, this has been seen as a step too far. Instead, the US government has been engaged in internecine diplomacy. Knight then explains how the US under Obama is opting for such diplomacy rather than military intervention. He says, using its good offices to prod Iraq's factions towards a national reconciliation effort that could give Sunni Arabs faith in a non-violent resolution to their complaints of discrimination by the Shiite government. Reconciliation could also lay the groundwork for Sunni Arab cooperation in stabilizing al-Mosul and other lost areas such as Fallujah. On the one hand, one could argue that diplomacy in today's hard times in the US seems to be the most cost-effective option and that the US is just going to stay out of it. But on the other hand, what about American exceptionalism that Obama recently emphasized? Could US laissez-faire in Iraq today be seen as a weakness in US foreign policy where radicals are allowed to take over with the whole world watching? Knight suggests with the ISIS forces capturing city after city, Washington has to do more and quickly to prevent the loss of government in Iraq. Intensified US on-the-ground mentoring of Iraqi military headquarters and perhaps US airstrikes might also be needed to reverse the collapse of Iraq's military. Also on Iraq, the Scotsman features an analysis titled "West Far from Blameless for Iraq Chaos," arguing that Iraq's dilemma immediate cause is the war in Syria, where a local challenge to President Bashar al-Assad quickly became internationalized as the United States and the Gulf-backed opposition to a Russian and Iranian allied government. The Scotsman piece argues that the US rapprochement with Iran should have been an opportunity to make peace in Syria, but the US priority has instead been nuclear diplomacy, and as Western-backed Syrian opposition groups have struggled with limited resources, their rivals, the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, the ISIS linked to al-Qaeda, have been raising money in the Gulf states. Now the ISIS is coming to Iraq to attack a government allied with its twin enemies, the US and Iran. It uses religious rhetoric to help justify this, though it may also include former members of Saddam Hussein's secularist regime. The above label in the Scotsman is to be questioned. Iran is certainly an enemy to the ISIS, but the US seemed not so much of an enemy, at least in the case of Syria. But what has allowed the ISIS to make such advances in Iraq is not simply their power, and this is explained in the rest of the Scotsman analysis, arguing the ISIS could not have made such progress if Iraq's own nation building had not gone so badly wrong. The Iraqi army is far larger and much better armed, yet it ran away from al-Mosul, having long felt unwelcome in a city where many regard the central government as illegitimate. And now we are joined by David Lawley, an expert on Iraq. Thank you very much for being on MidEast in Depth.
Hello, good afternoon.
David, Fareed Zakaria writes in the Washington Post arguing that what is happening today in Iraq is a result of the Bush administration's invasion of Iraq. Do you agree, and why?
Well, yes, of course, he's absolutely 100% right. ISIS, the clue is in the name, the Iraqi state of Iraq and Levant, they were formed just after the US invasion of Iraq over in the Sunni part of Iraq, Anbar province, and stemmed from Fallujah, which is the town that America and Britain so aptly bombed and left chemicals in during the 2000 war Phantom Fury invasion of Fallujah back in 2004. And it was after that war when 4,000 Iraqis lost their lives and children are still being born defected by the chemicals that now run through the water system of Fallujah, that the ISIS organization sprung up. Jihadists, they were then known in those old days as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but have now since changed their name and have become ISIS. And they've actually, since they went into Syria, been denounced by al-Shawari over in Pakistan, the Al-Qaeda over there. However, they are a jihadist massive group that does stem directly from the US-British invasion of Iraq back in 2003.
Mm-hmm. And the ISIS is, some papers and some media is saying that the ISIS considers that Iran and the US are both its enemy. But how is this true, especially in the case of Syria, when the US arguably turned a blind eye to what the ISIS is doing? So how is it considered an enemy now?
Well, this is it's a very interesting situation, because in Syria you have quite a different situation than what is going on, obviously, in Iraq. In Iraq, you've got the Maliki Shia government, which is supported and backed by Iran. They're also supported by the US, the United States, financially and militarily. So the two countries on this occasion, and probably quite likely we'll see soon, will be fighting on the same side, because what they see as terrorists, ISIS, is a problem for both of them that they wish to deal with. Whereas back up in Syria, when we take a look into Syria, ISIS were fighting there on the side of the rebels against the Shia or Shia affiliated, let's say. They're not actually Shias, but the Alawites, in other words, Bashar al-Assad. And it was in the interests of America to turn a blind eye, because they felt that once the Assad was is deposed, and some kind of situation where there's a mess like Libya can continue, and so on, it was better for them at the time to ignore ISIS. It's now amazing and ridiculous to think that they are considering bombing ISIS in both Iraq and in Syria, Obama now, because clearly they may well be missing ISIS and bombing the Free Syrian Army, which would be the people they were about to be on the same side as to bomb Assad. So this duplicity in the US foreign policy is just unbelievable, to be quite frank.
That was David Lawley Wakeland, filmmaker of the Alternative Iraq Inquiry. Thank you very much for joining us.
No, pleasure.
And for more updates, please visit levant.tv. That was it for today. Thanks for watching MidEast in Depth, and bye for now.